there are some artists who believe that they're essentially clairvoyants, that they are a mouthpiece for the, some people say spirit, the spirit of the times, the zeitgeist, the collective conscious, collective unconscious. What do you mean by beyond?
Well, I think that, okay, let me quote Derrida.
Uh-oh.
When he was saying that difference is before history. Because in the cosmos, you know, where whatever came before the human nature, or, you know, human beings were here, it's like there is this thing that everything is different, right? Not one little grain of sand is the same as the other grain of sand. So, in that sense, I think that when we have a way to express not why we are here in an exoteric, you know, but the fact that we're here, that we are doing things that sometimes are absurd, completely stupid, and the fact that we are engaged in very serious, you know, situations. What do we do with that? You know, how can we explain that I am supposed to do something that the fact that we invent so many things that work against us, all these problematics and, you know, phenomenons that sometimes, you know, do more damage than function in ways that can make us, you know, healthier, you know, people and more intelligent. And so art, to me, is that aspect of our existences that always give us a glimpse of our own contradictions, our own ways of making sense of what we're doing. And I think is what we call God in many ways. It is that level, you know.
Well, I remember when this painting, which is actually very small, isn't it? About like this.
No, it's about 2 by 1. Something.
It's like a notebook. I mean, in fact, it's the stitching and things like that makes it even seem like a notebook, and it could open or close, and it made me think about a lot of things, about how we...
Like an album.
Yes, but also how we have to... So it's an album, it's remembering, it's also talking across the 2 leaves of the album. There's a gap there, so we know that it's a struggle to do it. But this painting, which unfortunately is the one that reproduced the worst on these little cards, the colors are wrong, and I remember being very haunted by this painting because it seemed, well, I guess if we're going to be highfalutin, it struck me as the stuff like Lacan about the excess, the jouissance, that stuff that whatever we do in life and that we think, you know, we have and what we desire, there's always some excess that can't be put into expression. It's not susceptible to encoding. In some ways, it's like beyond, it escapes all of those things. And the fact that it was pictures of these figures that come from folkloric celebration. And I just remember thinking that this goes way out there in terms of things that don't get, that maybe can't, that only art can transfer them across that space. But also in some, I mean, it makes allusions to all kinds of other art, of course, and it's
the carnival.
Yes, the carnival, but it's also a little bit underwater. People are monstrous, and they're happy, and they're a little sinister. The masks are a little sinister, but also a little happy. And of course, there's, in addition to the figures of carnival, there are two naked female figures, one of which has got a really long neck, and the other one is more like a conventional nude. And I just remember thinking that this goes way out there in terms of things that don't get, that maybe can't, that only art can transfer them across that space.
What is happening here, it has to do, of course, with my own culture,
Sure.
experience, but
Because
also
it alludes to particular Puerto Rican folkloric events as well, right?
which is also, part of the most of the cultures of the world. That you have this combination of what we are as human and the animal kingdom, because all these horns come from there. But then it becomes, the personification of what is being called evil, and the personification of what is called, good, right? And so all these representations, you can see it in many cultures, but with differences. And here, you have that aspect of what you can call the folkloric, or you can call a kind of mythology, national mythology. And to me, it's like not only trying to give a pictorial representation of this representation that had to do with a wider thing in society, when society need to take like a space where you can take away all these energies and tensions and be more free and do things you would not do otherwise, right? And what the people would like to do but they can never do, or they are not able to do. So in situations like this, like in the theater, in the carnival, in a party, where people can liberate themselves a little bit more of these impositions. And here, it's like a theater in many ways that confronts the spectators, so that the characters themselves are in front of the spectators in ways that in theater doesn't happen, in classical theater.
Sure, sure.
And so I think that the mask is it's a very important, significant artifact that can be a way of uncovering, or a way to give layers to the layers that we have through ideology and behavior have been forced to wear. And that, of course, is part of the human condition, and even regardless if we accept it or not, it is through the mirror of art where we can think and reflect about this cultural and ideological layers that we have ourselves invented through generations. And sometimes we lose the consciousness and think that it's been there.
But some of these paintings make me think about something that I understood you to say years ago, which is that in some ways this says, okay, we are performing Puerto Ricanness for you. We are performing our national life. We are putting it on and living it.
Mm-hmm.
Not performing in a fake way, but performing in the sense of inhabiting roles in life. And so it makes me wonder when freedom fighters go to, as the freedom fighters for Puerto Rican independence did, as they went to the court and said, we will not participate in the trial, and did not mount a traditional legal defense, but said, no, we are freedom fighters, we are prisoners of war, our relationship to the United States government is not bound by U.S. laws. That's also a performance. It's a political performance. And it's clearly different from making a painting. Mm-hmm. But what do you think what's the relationship of making a painting and standing in front of the court and saying, your court doesn't even have the right to try me?
Well, I think that this is a term that always escapes my mind, but the objective, or what you're trying to do with something, is what is important. In a way that life can be considered a performance, right? And we all play our roles, and we all have to sometimes adapt to some conditions, and sometimes we rebel against those conditions. And the fact that we say the actors of history, by referring to the people who have participated and have an important role in the events of history, and we call them actors, not necessarily means that they are faking something, but because life is really the drama, right? The big drama, and I think that when you try to make a statement, for example, of an event, you know that you are using forms, artistic forms, that are not the real thing, but that maybe is the most powerful way to give meaning and to represent what happened, because what happened is already gone. So the only way you can achieve some memory of what happened, some presence of those things that are disappear in the movement, in the like Heraclitus river, right? So it's true, the ways that we have developed, the forms that we have developed through history, that have the strength and the power to keep it, to give them a concrete presence through the years, and so that we can reflect on that, So I think that when we were in the trials, in front of the judges and with the people who were in the court. It was like a theater too. And
It even looks like a theater.
In that theater, knowledge has to do, it determines a lot. If you know how that theater functions, then you can have a great performance. But if you don't know how that theater functions, you are there to disrupt the logic of this theater. And I think that we didn't have the knowledge of how this theater functions because we didn't have the experience of being in that theater, because we didn't have the necessity or the need or the desire to abide by the rules of that theater. So I think that in a way, what we did was to disrupt the rules and the logic of this theater. And so, like Antonin had taught with the theater of cruelty, he wanted to make the theater a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in a way that's what was happening there, because these people who will have the control of the theater didn't know what to do,
Mm-hmm.
because we were not following the rules. And they say, or they thought, that these people are crazy because they don't know. If you don't follow the rules of this theater, the punishment is going to be real.
Yeah.
Real punishment. So otherwise, they're crazy, or they're mad, or they're ignorant, or they are really understand the logic of this theater. And we cannot allow these people, to show other people how this theater, works. So if we had this interpretation, basically, we can conclude that one way to perform is to end the performing. In other words, to have a moment of light, a moment of saying, okay, we are all performing, but this is like this is like that, and we think that this theater is not valid anymore. So I think that in that way you can compare what happened there with what happens in the other level of life, which is art.
Mm.
And how these relationships, effect, cause, how these things come back to each other is something that is, will be interesting to investigate. But I think that sometimes the theater of life is more theater than theater itself.
Sure.
Right? But on the other hand, in order to continue to provide, a continuity through forms that has the capacity to resist the test of time is another thing. So by reading a novel by Dostoevsky, or a narration by Dostoevsky, like the House of the Dead, I was able, in prison, to learn more about my own experience and the experience of people who were, in 100 years before me, how that writing was so powerful that it made me realize that things were almost the same as a century ago, with the differences, of course, but that the experience of that space was mostly more or less the same. And that's something that you can only get from a writing by somebody who was an artist, by somebody who lived it, by somebody who was able to transmit that to us. And I don't think any historical book can provide that.
Well, what do you think are the limitations of art? I mean, there were people in Puerto Rican history who did not do art. They did armed actions. They did throughout Puerto Rican history. There are uprisings. There are individual people who take guns in their hands and go, for example, to the U.S. Congress. There are mass organizations. There are things that fall in the sort of sphere of more the political, in a limited sense. I wonder if you have any thoughts about the difference, what is the boundary between, because we don't want to get carried away and say it's all theater. So what would you think about those things?
Well, I think that everything have a limit, but limit doesn't mean limitation. It means a ample field of activity, which is the contrary of the definition of limit as limitation. You know, limit is something, affirmation of possibilities, but understanding that those possibilities have specificity and a range, you know. So I think that creativity, the same way that power is everywhere, creativity is everywhere. And it's in prison, it's in people who practice law, in people who practice medicine, scientists, religious people. Creativity is something that is there to be used. But creativity in the sense of art, in a more specific thing, is a different thing. So to me, you know, I think that the understanding of what it is, of what is what determines how effective are you going to be to change that objective reality according to the needs of the different situation or movement or political orientations.